Welcome to Pluralsight, and welcome to this course on building dynamic websites with PHP and MySQL. I'm Dr. Chris Brown. In this brief introductory lesson, we'll look at the overall structure and content of the course. We'll look at the architecture of web applications and understand the role of PHP and MySQL within that architecture. I'll introduce you to the course's case study. I'll talk a little bit about the prerequisite knowledge that you need in order to get the most from this course. And I'll outline the requirements if you want to follow along with the demonstrations. Now here's the big picture of the architecture of web applications. We begin when a browser visits a specific URL. It sends a request to a web server, in this case Apache, for a specific resource. And the protocol that's used for this request and the response is called HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. If the request is for a simple static HTML file, Apache simply delivers that file to the browser, and there's an end to it. But for a dynamic website, the request is processed, at least in part, by a server-side scripting language, in our case PHP. In many cases, the script will consult a back-end database, in our case MySQL. The language that's used to talk to the database is called SQL, Structured Query Language, a language that's now nearly 40 years old. Now the result of all of this is to generate HTML markup and send it back to the browser. And in many cases there'll be some JavaScript mixed in with this to allow the browser to access and manipulate the objects on the page. We won't be meeting any JavaScript in this course though. And the underlying operating system is, in our case, Linux. Architecturally, the design is usually viewed as having three layers. The presentation layer is responsible for maintaining the user interface. The business layer is where the business rules of the application are implemented. Business rules can mean almost anything. For example, customers can't cancel orders after they've been shipped. Customers with a voucher code get a discount. The weather forecast that's delivered is tailored to your geographic location. Business rules could be almost anything. And the data layer is where the data is actually stored. That is the database, along with the low-level parts of the code that access it. Obviously, the focus in this course is on the PHP and MySQL components. Of course, these aren't the only technologies that can fulfill these roles. In Microsoft's world, the web server will be IIS, the business layer would likely be written in C# or Visual Basic, and the data layer is more likely to be SQL Server, and the operating system, of course, will be Windows. Being a web developer is a big ask. You need to have some level of competence in quite a number of technologies. Now, the case study that we'll be using throughout the course concerns a lending library. The library needs a website so that users can browse the available books, and so that librarians can administer the loan of those books, to check a book out to a borrower, to check a book back in, to add a new book, to add a new borrower, and so on. And the library needs a database to store information about its books and its borrowers. Here's the overall structure of the course. Module 2, we'll actually install and assemble the pieces of the LAMP stack. In Module 3, we'll begin to integrate them. We'll see how to have PHP interact with the user by pulling data off of an HTML form. In Module 4, we'll discuss the design of the lending libraries database. We'll implement it and we'll populate it with some test data. In Module 5, we'll see how we can access and manipulate that data from within PHP. Module 6 has a rather mysterious title there. This module deals with things like scalar queries, prepared statements, and stored procedures. And if you haven't got a clue what I'm talking about here, don't worry, you will after you've seen the lesson. Module 7 deals with the tricky issue of how the server remembers stuff about you as you proceed through the pages of the web application, and how it can recognize you if you visit the site again. In Module 8, we'll look at the privilege system within MySQL, and we'll set up user accounts to give the minimum privilege necessary for our PHP scripts to do what they need to do. And in Module 9, we'll finally pull everything together and build the complete working site. Module 10 talked about some security-related issues, ranging from defending against SQL injection attacks to setting up packet filtering rules to create a firewall and backing up the database. And if you're wondering where Module 1 has gone off this list, well, you're watching it. To make the best use of this course, you should ideally have a basic knowledge of HTML, the basic structure of HTML, and how HTML forms work. You need to have some level of competence with command line Linux, just basic file and directory management, the use and modification of access permissions on files, and you'll need to have at least a way of editing text files. You'll need to have a little bit of experience of Apache configuration. Now I will show you the minimum that you need to get by with that. And you'll need, ideally, a little bit of background about relational databases and SQL. Now, I will talk to you about all of these topics and introduce them as they come along, but I will not be explicitly giving a lot of coverage of the topics listed here. Finally, we're going to assume that you know a little bit of PHP, basic program structure, how to write a loop and a branch, arrays, things like that. Now, if you want to follow along with the demonstrations, and I very much hope you will, I recommend that you install CentOS 6. I'm using CentOS 6.4. Just do a basic installation. We'll cover the business of installing Apache and PHP and the MySQL pieces in the next lesson. You can install it into a virtual machine or onto bare metal, or it could be a cloud instance, for example in Amazon's EC2. You will need internet access from this machine to install the software from the repositories. There's no reason not to use some other Linux distribution, but the installation tools may be different, particularly if you're using a Debian-derived distribution like Ubuntu, which uses different package management tools. And you'll probably find some differences in the sort of out-of-the-box configuration of some of the bits and pieces. If you want to use Windows or Mac OS X, for this, that may be a bit more of a challenge. The core PHP and MySQL pieces should be much the same, but the configuration will be considerably different, and installation will be completely different too. Well, that completes the introduction. We'll just wrap up this lesson with a quick demonstration of the case study for our lending library so that you've got some idea of where we're headed with this.